Hello everyone, I'm Jennifer from Joy of Stationery, and it's been a while, and a lot of that is because it's been a while since I've felt like I could even film a video, but here we are. And what I did want to do was catch you up a little bit on what's been going on with regard to my planners and journals. It's been an interesting number of months that I have felt in some ways a little bit scattered with regards to my planners and my journals, with moments where I feel like I've gotten it. I'm not entirely sure if I know where I am on that spectrum at the moment, but I thought that maybe I would share what the books are that I've been in, and there are a number of them, and what I've been using them all for, as well as maybe some initial thoughts about my setup, my lineup, and maybe in the hopes of kind of clarifying it for myself as well. One thing that I did want to mention is that I live in Scotland, and the city in which I live, it's been really, really very dark and wet weather for quite some time, and we haven't really had a lot of pockets of good daylight. And once we also had daylight saving in the United Kingdom, it's gotten much darker much earlier as well. So I suppose in that regard, with regard to natural light and having enough daylight to film alongside kind of juggling everything at work, etc., it has been a little bit difficult. Even today, it's not the brightest of days, unfortunately, so I apologize for the lighting, but I just wanted to try this out just in case it might, still be somewhat visible. And this is not the most well positioned in terms of light either, but I'll just kind of give this a shot for now, and hopefully I'll get a chance to think a little bit more about what might make for better filming in the next several weeks. What you see before you is a book that I had started around the mid-year mark, maybe just before the mid-year mark, that I had a lot of high hopes about, and that I've mentioned in just a couple of my most recent videos, I think. And this is the Hobonichi Cousin. It's actually in the HON form, although you see a cover here in front of you, and that's because I have actually been able to find that the A5 or Cousin HON can fit into a number of my A5 covers. I know that it's not advertised as such, and I think I've heard many people say that it can't actually fit in the covers unless you have something that has a little bit more room, whether that might be a zipper cover or a trifold of some kind, or a trogan. But for whatever reason, I have been able to get my Hobonichi A5 HON to fit in the cover without too much struggle. Here, I think, this front cover might be raised just slightly, but it's actually not too bad at all. And I actually do have the covers in, or the cover of the HON tucked into the fabric covers themselves, and I have a leather one as well that I've been able to fit this into. So I'm not sure if that's just kind of lucky, or if it is the case that the HON can actually fit a number of covers. So, but in any case, I have really liked the combo of having the hardcover HON along with a fabric cover. Perhaps to some that might seem like a little bit of overkill. The hardcover already has, quite a protective cover because it is a hard cover as opposed to a soft cover book. But I have really liked it because for some reason I think that the hard cover of the HON kind of gives it a kind of structure that I have appreciated, and the cover on top, especially something like this one, has also given it that kind of comfortable feeling because there's a softness to it and a kind of tactility to it that I can really enjoy. So as I mentioned, this is one book that I started in the middle of the year, and I wanted to start with it because it was meant to be a kind of anchor book, something that could hopefully be a cornerstone of my lineup and a central space, especially for the work. And yet it's not one that I have been using recently. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of what my hopes for this were and how I had been using it. And I do think that there is kind of room for this to be a crucial part of my setup in the future as well. And I'm just trying to figure out how and when that would be. This sort of came along during a time of this year when I was just feeling a great deal of overwhelm, and for everything that's been going on just in terms of my life and my work, there was so much to keep track of, and it was really, I felt like it was really difficult with the number of various projects going on at any given time. So many things to keep track of that I thought, you know what, I think I need a bigger book, since I typically gravitate to the A6 size and the weeks size in terms of Hobonichi techos. So I thought maybe this can be a time that I try to revisit the A5 cousin size. Also, my apologies if you can hear, I think there's some construction going on outside. So apologies if you can kind of hear that. So this was meant to be, and really was actually for a time, a kind of lifesaver book, a kind of anchor book, as I mentioned, where I could centralize all the various components of my work schedule, of my different projects. Not only that, but also have it all in a book that could serve as an archive of the work year. And that's something that's been really important to me, I've realized over the years, is just how much having books that I can archive and look back on has been important for my work as an academic, just because so many projects, for example, are ones that might be ongoing over the course of several years. So it helps to have a kind of record of when a project started, what that progress was. Similarly, with something like teaching, it really helps to have a kind of record of which courses that I've taught in any given year, what the notes for that were, what some of the changes might have been, and kind of looking back on that and sort of seeing the trajectory of those courses and what might be revised, what might be brought back from previous years, things like that. And so I guess it's just been the case in my line of work that having an archive of many of those kinds of things has ended up being quite invaluable. So as I was saying, this book was meant to be an attempt at harnessing and kind of compiling all of those in a planner that I could use to organize myself and to organize my work and to plan for it more effectively than I have been, as well as to keep track and provide a kind of documentation and archive of the various things that I've done in my work. So let me perhaps show you a little bit of how that had been going. And so I might just show you, for example, what that might look like. And let me just go to, so my monthlies have been fairly minimal, and it really was meant to just be a way to keep track of specific time-bound appointments and to see where there might be kind of clashes on the schedule. The idea was also to put personal life, appointments, events, what have you, that calendar in this as well, precisely because that would also affect what I might decide on, for example, with my professional life scheduling, insofar as I have control over that. So it's been quite minimal, and as you can see, I try to use some highlighting, some color coding just to help me sort of visualize things at a glance, and to be able to get a quick blueprint of the month at any given point. And because it was serving this function and it was meant to be an anchor book, the idea was that any appointments, anything schedule related, anything at all, professionally or personally, I would be funneling into here and putting that in the monthly pages. So that was the idea for this. In terms of the weeklies, and as I mentioned about the weeklies, it was really in kind of mid-year that I had picked this up in order to see if that could help me more effectively. So I'll give you some examples of how this was working. This was really an area for me to try to do a kind of time blocking, both for planning and both for kind of recording or logging what actually happened, and where I could set out goals for the day or priorities for the day, as well as maybe many reflections on how things ended up going. So it is a kind of messy planning, and that's precisely what the function, was for. That is to say, it was intended to be very functional kind of planning for me. And this, changed shape in different ways across the weeks and the months that I used this, where, I started out with trying to block off the kind of top section of the vertical weeklies in order to record, say, priorities for that day, things like that. And then also blocking off the bottom portion for reflections, other kinds of notes that were pertinent to the day, and then having the middle section that pertained to, say, work hours, or again, the hours that I would be kind of active doing things, in order to block out time to kind of record the tasks and activities that were going on. And that was something that I think I tried for the first time on this particular week in June. And I continued on with it, changing things a little bit here and there. So trying to find a way to kind of color code time blocking for what I initially kind of planned to do, and then perhaps some time blocking where there were some changes to what ended up happening. And so different projects or different tasks might have been done at different times, and I would try to block that out. And that became a little bit more streamlined, as you can see here, where I started to have kind of a second column of highlighting in order to show what the breakdown of the day actually ended up looking like in terms of where I allocated certain hours, or to what I allocated certain hours, certain kinds of tasks or projects and things like that. And so that's what you can kind of see as I go along here. It became a little bit more streamlined. It became a little bit more even more kind of functional in that way, where it was really kind of serving to try to be a kind of record of time, as well as a way to kind of organize or plan out my time. And this is something that kind of went on for some time. I had some hiccups here and there, but for the most part, this was something that I was trying out. You can see that I've, changed up some things. I tried to kind of use stickers, washi tape, or stamps as kind of indicators for certain kinds of information, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, it was a number of weeks that I was able to kind of use it in this way, and helped in a lot of ways, especially as I was trying to get myself organized and get myself feeling not quite as overwhelmed with keeping track of everything that I needed to do and allocating time for it. With regard to the daily pages then, let me show you a little bit of how that ended up panning out. I was trying to make the daily pages, again, purely functional, but pages where I could almost archive certain kinds of notes, and that would give me, if I flipped to any given page, it would give me kind of a snapshot of what it was that I worked on that day, right? What sort of the priorities were, what projects I was working on any given day, especially for days where there might be a lot to cover, or specifically for, you know, tracking the progress of certain kinds of projects. So you can see that that's where a lot of this space was kind of used for those notes. I ended up, because this was meant to be primarily a work kind of anchor book, a kind of professional planner, I ended up using the weekends, the daily pages, to do a kind of weekly review. So that's what you kind of see here, and that's why I had a little bit more decoration on weekend pages. That was also a way to kind of visually cue for me that those were kind of weekend days, if that makes sense. And I was, again, trying to use it as a kind of weekly review. I thought it would be a good practice to do, and I still very much think that it is a really good practice to have. Have I necessarily kept up with it? Not exactly, just due to just sheer exhaustion with everything, but it's helpful to see and helpful to know that it's there, because I can kind of remind myself of the value of it and perhaps continue to kind of go back to doing these kinds of things. So again, you can kind of see a lot of that. I would also have some meeting notes in here, for example, and I would use this is actually from the Hobonichi memo pads. This is the A6 size, but the A6 memo pads have perforated pages, so I was able to kind of remove that from the booklet itself, and as you can see, kind of tip in or tape it, attach it to the page, just to kind of show, you know, additional notes if I ran out of space on the pages. I know that Hobonichi has since now, ever since their new release, has come out with the sticky notes that I think are of a size that if you needed to extend the space of the page, you can. But I, again, this was before the release, and I actually like the fact that the memo pads have the Tomoe River paper, so it's the same thinness or thickness of the Hobonichi paper in the techos. So it's been really nice to just kind of keep it streamlined there. So, you know, again, some other examples of how things were kind of how things were being used and utilized in the daily pages. Again, in very kind of functional ways. I was really trying to use it to help me kind of organize myself and to keep track of different projects, as you can see here. So I was playing around at some points with, you know, with trying out different kinds of things, you know, having little boxes. And these little boxes were actually inspired by a Hobonichi employee who I think had used a techo specifically to keep track of diet-related things. I think it was an A6 techo, but I thought it was such a good way to kind of, you know, see the same boxes, for example, every day and have that kind of record day by day. It didn't last incredibly long, as you can see there, but I still think it's a good idea. I think I would just need to have a better idea of how I want to deploy it and how I want to organize it, essentially. So that's essentially kind of how I had been, you know, using the daily pages. And what I tried to feel okay about was the fact that each of the daily pages was inevitably going to look very different from, you know, from any other daily page, really, because it was about centering what I needed on that day, you know. So in a sense, I was really kind of thinking about the daily pages of the Hobonichi A5 Cousin HON in this instance as a kind of workbook for my professional life. So the workbook could be used for any project, right? So notes on a particular project, you know, whatever I needed space for that day for some analog organizing or recording or planning, what have you. So I really liked that idea, and it really helped me to kind of think about that space as a workbook. That I feel like that kind of allowed me to be okay with the flexibility of not having pages look the same every day, because that space was meant to help me for whatever I needed it for that day. So that's kind of what had been going on with this book, and it's, I think, a system that was working really well for me. And in a funny way, what ended up derailing it, or perhaps, derailing isn't quite the word for it. It's simply more that my needs were shifting a little bit, especially once the academic year and the teaching term began in earnest, just because that's when the calendar and the schedule can look very different, and priorities across all of the different projects, across all of the different areas where I have to be kind of active in my career, end up changing, end up shifting around. So all of a sudden, especially with thinking of things like, I think teaching prep, assessment, other kinds of things that were particular to the active teaching term starting up, felt to me like it needed more compartmentalization. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, something that I really appreciated about this was being able to think about the daily pages as a kind of workbook for what I needed it for. But what I also realized that I might need is a kind of dedicated book or dedicated space that can be focused on a particular area and the value in archiving that particular idea, for example, for that particular area. So that was this book. It is still around, but again, I haven't really picked it up because, as I mentioned, I've had these kinds of other needs. Something that really resonated with me recently from a few videos that I've seen on YouTube were with creators who were who kind of touched upon how they wish they could be one book people in terms of the planning, but ultimately kind of realizing and recognizing that what their life and work demands require of them are things that can't be contained in just one book. And I think that has very much been the case for me. And it's almost a kind of struggle that I have every year, where ideally there is something really kind of wonderful about being able to kind of have one book and feel like it has everything in it. And I think just for the way that my mind works and what I ultimately end up needing in terms of planning, managing overwhelm, is that I think some level of compartmentalizing is something that really helps me. And not only just for the organizing and planning, but it turns out for the archiving. So being able to pick up certain techos or planners and know that that's where my research projects live, to pick one up from a year or two ago and know exactly which courses and kind of the information about those courses and how that course went that particular year, to know that that's in another book, rather than, let's say, if I were to try to use all of that in this book, to have to flip through pages to find information related to course design and teaching and assessment, and it's all mixed in on different pages alongside different research projects. And so in terms of the utility value of what I need an archive for, this would end up being its own kind of overwhelm, if that makes sense. So all that being said, something that I think realized for myself, especially with the increase in physical exertion and commuting related to the teaching term, is needing to have some of those books readily on hand, but also more portable. And though this, this isn't terrible, in the scheme of things, it is still a bit of a hefty book to have to bring around with me, especially if I'm on the go, and especially, with the ways in which when I'm, say, on site or on campus, there isn't always just one place that I need to report to. There might be multiple buildings, and kind of navigating between buildings alongside managing my own kind of chronic condition that can make it more challenging for me. What I decided was that I would try to, I suppose, streamline or focus certain aspects, certain areas of my work life into their kind of appropriate A6 sized shell, if that makes sense. I'm ending with a voiceover here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will continue with my A6 setups in another video in the interest of time. See you in the next one.